So we are going to, first program is factors to consider in selecting a title insurance company. And our speaker is John Kazazis, president of ARS Abstract, which recently celebrated the company's 25th year in business, and it's a policy issuing agent on behalf of First American Title Insurance Company. ARS Abstract has issued over 25,000 policies covering residential and commercial properties, including its participation on the New York City 42nd Street redevelopment project at 4 Times Square, as well as transactions involving IDAs to facilitate economic development throughout New York. My pleasure to present John Kazazis.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for coming. I'm not quite sure if anybody was in the other room when I was just talking, so hopefully it won't be repetitive. But as Harry mentioned, I've owned and operated ARS Abstract for the last 25 years. And we've seen a lot in the last 25 years as far as practices, title companies, agencies coming and going. And what I wanted to talk to you about is some of the thought processes that go into selecting a title insurance company. Normally, we basically work with real estate practitioners as well as mortgage lenders. And in a contract of sale, the contract would designate any reputable title company can be used in a transaction. But over the past couple of years, how do you define reputable? There have been several companies that have gone out of business. A company, Commonwealth Land Title, after 150 years of doing business in New York, throughout the country, filed for bankruptcy before being taken over by another underwriter. New Jersey Title, Washington Title, in the last 2 years have ceased to do business in New York State. A couple of large title agencies have no longer do business in New York. So how do you define reputable? How do you choose a company? You're looking for a reputation of a company. You're looking for a long standing. And you're also looking for reserves. Whether you deal with a title insurance company or whether you deal with a title insurance agency, the fees are the same. Whether you go to either or, the fees are the same. So you're looking for the reputation. You're looking for how long that company has been doing business. Can you talk to the owner of the company? Can business decisions be made? And what type of those decisions are based on sound legal principles? New York real estate is a solid investment. It's a sound investment. But what makes it a solid and sound investment is title insurance. Whether you own that property and enjoy the benefits of owning that property, or whether you may be involved with litigation in that real property will be determined by title insurance. And one of the practices that make title insurance different from other forms of insurance is that we make a determination prior to closing of title to insure that transaction, as opposed to other forms of insurance that makes a determination based on a casualty calculation, age of the party, medical history of the person. We basically make a thorough examination of title. We identify problems. We report those problems in a commitment, and we ask tough questions. Our business is generated through attorneys who represent buyers as well as mortgage brokers and lenders. But most of our day is really dealing with the sales attorney on a transaction, or whoever is basically dealing with those exceptions to be cleared prior to title. Many times, I have been working with sales attorneys, and they would make a comment that, well, I don't have to deal with this if I deal with XYZ title company. Why do you give me a problem? It's not our intention to give people problems. It's basically our intention to basically identify and eliminate risk prior to the closing so that there is no problem subsequent to that closing. Some of the problems that we deal with, fraud. We need to know whether or not the parties who execute documents are in fact the parties they state to be when they go to closing. Photo ID. Is the person who was at the closing, is it truly the person at the closing? Is it somebody else? Is it a marital situation where somebody is maybe bringing somebody else, a boyfriend, girlfriend, rather than their spouse? If anything goes wrong, we are liable for that. What about when we report on title and we report 2-3 mortgages, and the seller's attorney is basically telling us prior to closing, well, I have a SAT on that mortgage. Our job is to look at that SAT. Is there anything outside of the norm? Was that satisfaction just issued? How was it paid for? How was there any other simultaneous transaction that went towards paying off that mortgage? That's why we always ask for the underlying mortgage and note, especially with private mortgages. Lines of credit. We have to make sure that lines of credit are closed and canceled at closing. There are situations when people could bring a payoff letter to a closing on a line of credit. And if the line of credit is not frozen, if it's not canceled, and if we make the payoff at the closing, and we transmit those funds to the bank, all that does is bring basically the balance down to zero, whereby they can just draw it back up again. I've heard of claims like that. LLCs, corporations, partnerships, these are entities that may own real property, and our job is to review those documents to make sure that the people who consist of the LLC, the corporation, and the partnerships have basically consented to the transaction. And again, we're working with parties to the transaction that are providing us information. So we have to examine those documents. Have the documents been notarized? Have they been acknowledged? Are the parties represented by counsel? You have to be especially careful if they're not represented by counsel, if they come to closing pro se with documents. I'd just like to say a case that was just hit one of the title companies up near Yankee Stadium recently. It was an LLC that conveyed to another LLC no consideration. There were 3 mortgages on the property. There were 3 foreclosures on each of the mortgages. The person it was an LLC that conveyed to another person, and then that person to a bona fide purchaser for value, where that title company took all the documents. They took the SACs, they took the stipulations of discontinuance, they took the deed from the LLC A and B into the LLC bona fide purchaser value. All of the documents were forged. It was the same notary on all of the documents, and it resulted in a total failure of title. $6 million that the title company had to make good on. The person who perpetuated the fraud is in prison. The agency no longer is representing that underwriter, and the underwriter had to pay for it. So it is our job to basically ask the tough questions and to basically address those issues prior to closing, so that the purchaser, so the lender, if they have to foreclose on the mortgage, is not basically dealing with problems in the future. So that's a little bit about what we do. And the other thing that we have to be concerned about is reserves. There are a number of companies out there that have been in New York for quite some time, and there's some companies that are coming into New York from elsewhere. What you have to look at is reserves. What happens in the event that there is a claim? I just mentioned $6 million. Are the reserves there so as to pay that claim? So that's a little bit of what we do. That's a little bit of the thought processes that go into selecting a title company. And I'd like to hand it off to Gus Alamaris now. If there's any questions.